I'm Cole Haddon, and welcome back to 5 a.m. Story Talk. Today's guest has been a TV executive, a producer, and a pipeline builder across multiple film TV studios, including working on my TV series Dracula while at NBC. Until recently, she was the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion North America at Warner Brothers Discovery. I'm talking about DEI pioneer Karen Horne here. Buckle up, because this is going to be a hell of a conversation.
There was a McKinsey report a couple years ago about the 10 billion with a B dollars of Black dollars alone that is being left on the table in Hollywood. 10 billion with a B. Like, what industry knowingly leaves $10 billion on the table? I've always said, don't do this work because it's your moral objective. Do it because of the business imperative of it.
Welcome back, Story Talkers. How's the week treating you? The weather's finally starting to improve here in Victoria, Australia, where I live. Speaking of which, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, what we call Australia today, and pay respects to elders past and present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. You'll hear me acknowledge country from time to time here at 5 a.m. Story Talk as part of the respect owed to the First Nations people here who continue to be the only Indigenous culture in the West to exist without a treaty with the government that's using their land. Colonialism, man, its legacy is eternal. We're having a bit of a row about it here at the moment as racist nationalists have been trying to drum up fury about immigration in Australia. They're getting a lot of help from the media here, especially the likes of the Murdochs of the world. But at the end of the day, Australia is a multicultural country. Imperfect, yeah, but every decent person here knows it's the only viable way forward for us. Speaking of multiculturalism, let's talk about my guest today, who has been a leading player in Hollywood's transformation from a manufacturer of hegemonically white and predominantly white male stories into the wildly diverse industry it is today, where women and people of color enjoy statistically appropriate representation in front of and behind the camera. Yeah, that's still a fantastic vision of the future, and maybe a future that's still decades away too. But it's improving in fits and starts, in large part because of the work done by people like Karen, whom I asked to join me for some 5 a.m. story talk about the backlash against DEI in Hollywood and the United States today. Those three little letters, DEI, have done so much to transform the lives of women, people of color, LGBTQIA+ people, and even disabled people in the United States following the Civil Rights Act. And yet, since the 2024 U.S. presidential election, they've become right-wing shouting points. If you're someone who bristles at the term DEI these days, maybe you even have trouble defining it because you've never understood how it's helped you and your loved ones in industries across America, then I strongly encourage you to give this episode a chance, especially if you're an artist unfamiliar with how profitable diverse storytelling is. Leaving aside the moral motivation some bring to this subject, as a purely economical one, the numbers are pretty damn clear here. Now, I'm a white dude myself who has only been an activist when it comes to this issue, but I think I bring a lot to the later part of my conversation with Karen too, specifically about the systemic discrimination I witnessed during the staffing of a TV show I created. Let's throw out the political hyperboles and outright lies and try to understand this issue and what's at stake better together. All that said, we're going to laugh a lot, and maybe you will too, despite how confronting a lot of what we discuss might be for you. When the episode wraps, you'll want to stick around. Karen returns for a bonus episode of 5 a.m. Story Talk. Typically, I ask my guests to pick a seminal piece of art from their lives to break down with me, but I like to leave the definition of that request broad so my guests can put their own spin on things. In Karen's case, we're going to skip discussing a seminal piece of art from her life and instead take a look at the cultural and economic impact of three seminal pieces of diverse art in Hollywood's history: A Different World, Barbie, and Sinners. How did and does centering non-white male characters and themes impact the success of these films and TV series in the context of Hollywood history, but also American history? Okay, I think that's everything for now. So without further ado, let me introduce you to DEI pioneer and all-around badass, Karen Horne. Hello, Karen. Thank you so much for joining me today. How's life going in America?
Well, This Is America. The Donald Glover song Childish Gambino comes to mind. This is America. I said a lot recently that it doesn't surprise me because if this is surprising to you, read a book, learn our history. But it is gut wrenching nonetheless to see what's happening. And I think that like what's happening in our society right now will affect generations to come. And that's a little bit scary. But, we've gotten through it before, and I'm very hopeful that we will make it through this time and continue on bigger, better, and stronger.
I'm doing my best to hold on to hope.
Yeah. I'm going to come join you very soon. I'm going to come join you in Australia. That's what I'm going to do.
We're obviously going to get into some bigger subjects, but before we do, I'd love to just get to know you a bit more. You grew up in Jersey, correct?
Yep, I did. Yes. I grew up in Jersey. I'm a proud Jersey girl, big New York sports fan. Go Knicks, even though we didn't make it past the semifinals, like go Knicks. I am, very proud. And if you give me one martini, the Jersey will come out. The accent will come out strong. But yes, I did grow up in Jersey. I always say like most people do, you can take me out of Jersey, but you can never take Jersey out of me. So I'm very proud of that.
What was Jersey like for you? How does it still, I guess, inform you today? And do you still have people there?
Not a lot of people in Jersey. My parents are gone. I'm biracial. So I grew up in a time where there were not a lot of people like me in my town. I'm pretty sure that the Gomes family was really the Gomez family, but they called themselves the Gomes family. And so I literally thought I was a unicorn. I didn't know of any other, part black, part white kid growing up in my and when I was growing up, but grew up with my mom, the black single mom who raised me. And I often say to people, I'm a biracial black woman because I grew up with my black mom. I went to North Carolina every summer with my black grandma and aunts and uncles. And so that's who I am and that's who I identify as. And I think, there's part of me that always had to being biracial, my proudness of being a black woman was even louder. And I think maybe it was even there that I started on my quest to make sure that there was equity. And because I often saw that people treated me a little differently because I was, light skin. This is stuff like black people laundry, but here it goes. Like, had good hair and light skin and I hated that, So I would really kind of go the other way of talking about like a person's intent and like, the person, what's inside of them that matters, not the color of their skin. And so I started this maybe like even before I could form full sentences, but that's always been who I am. And that's always going to be that's always who I was. And it's always going to be who I am.
So how did you get from Jersey to LA? You went to university
Yes, in Jersey. I did. Went to a school called Montclair State University, which is actually the #1 school in Jersey for broadcasting. I wanted to study broadcasting. My older sister, our high school had a program called CAS, Communications, Arts, and Science Training. And one day she had to come home and look at a sitcom and see how many cameras there were. And it really kind of made me look at TV a different way. Like I was like, oh, wait, there are cameras here. This is it's not just people on, talking and telling a story. There's someone writing this and it made me look at it a different way. And I really wanted to be Barbara Walters and who is, of course, one of the best women broadcasters there were. And so I went to school for broadcasting and I got a job working at ABC my senior year of college, which was really cool. And I got to meet Barbara Walters. And I went up and I talked to her and I was like, you're the reason why I'm studying broadcasting. And she was really generous, very cool. And then I stood back and I looked at the people lining up to meet her and the people lining up to meet her boss. And there were more people who wanted to meet him than her. And I was like, who's he? And what does he do? Because she's Barbara Walters and more people want to meet him. And that's when I kind of learned about the offices that I have sat in for most of my career. I was a receptionist at that time and I got a job working for ABC Sports. I'm a huge sports fan and know a lot about it. but was a terrible typist. I'm still kind of a hunter and pecker, and so I would get in early because I was working in the sports program planning and acquisition, and I had to do competitive information reports. And I'm dating myself, but it was before the luxury of computer where you could just drag things over. So I would get in very early to make sure that my reports were done early before the day started. That was New Jersey. That New York came out of there before the day started. And the only other person who was in during that hour was the guy who's, the head of that department. And so his desk became open and he asked me to come and work for him. He was like, look, I know you're a terrible typist. You don't need to do that. You're really great with people. That's what I need you to do on my desk. So come and work for me. I did. He was a rising star at ABC and in this industry. He was promoted to be executive vice president of the network, and I got to learn all about the network and the different departments and news and entertainment, and he, primetime entertainment. And then he got promoted again and was asked to move to Los Angeles to be president of all of ABC Entertainment, and moved me out here with him. And so I moved out to Los Angeles with him. And then he got promoted again and went back to New York to lead all of ABC. And I stayed here with him because the guy was dating, moved out. He was my husband. And, he was working at Warner Brothers. And I was just like, well, I remembered something my mom had said to me was the only thing who beats a failure is someone who never tries. And I thought, if I'm going to stay here and do this, I'm going to stay here and do this. And so I didn't move back. That boss, by the way, was a guy named Bob Iger, who is still a rock star in the industry. But I learned a lot from him. I learned about leadership. I learned about how you lead your teams, how you treat other people. And I've carried that with me throughout my career about being good and fair in business. And I was a great person to learn how to be a good executive from. So when I left in ABC, I went and ran a not-for-profit film organization called the Black Filmmaker Foundation. And I think it was really there that kind of cemented my love of finding and nurturing talent. And during that time, I also sold a series to HBO that I produced. It was an adult animated series based on a comic book called Spawn. And before that show even premiered, Disney called me, and this is pre-Bob. Disney called me and asked me about running their writing and directing programs. And I went and was, I just had a baby and I didn't really care about getting that job because I was going to be a stay-at-home mom / producer. And I got the job, and it was and continues to be one of the most rewarding things that I had ever done in my career, which is finding and nurturing talent and giving people who have been historically excluded from this business and many businesses an opportunity. I always say that, talent plus opportunity equals success. And so I often, that's where I've made my, really made the most meaningful part of my career is finding that talent, providing an opportunity and watching them succeed. And so from just, quickly from Disney, I went to Nickelodeon and created their stuff. And then I went to NBC, where a lot of the pipeline programs and initiatives I created there really became a blueprint for the industry, and then was most recently at Warner Media, then Warner Brothers Discovery. But yeah, that's it.
During the stretch, because I expect it'll inform some of the things that the work you did later in your life, you Black woman, so both Black and a woman. You also just said you entered this new part of your life as a new mother, often a very difficult place where women are discriminated against within the workplace in Hollywood and across the states. Did you witness much of this in your own career? Did it impact you at all?
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of times people don't know exactly what I am, and that's very revealing, particularly in New York. When I started ABC, there weren't a lot of mentors. There weren't a lot of you had to make sure that if you wanted to learn, you had to go out on your own and really kind of foster those relationships. And people should still do that if they want mentors. But you often see people let down their guard around someone when they don't exactly know what they are, or if they assign them what they want them to be. And so, yeah, I saw a lot, especially working in a sports division. At one point you see a lot, and it's a lot different. I think it was a lot different then, than it is now. It was way before Me Too and Time's Up, and so you could see a lot of that. There was not a lot of people who looked like me. And even when I moved to ABC in Los Angeles in the entertainment division, there was one other female Black executive. And I wanted to clump onto her. I wanted to know so much about her. And she just wanted to, make her own mark there. So yeah, I mean, and then, becoming a mom and working, the balance is real. Like you can't, yeah, the allowances weren't there. My son's 29. And so, the allowances that you have now, making sure that there are, nursing rooms or time off for parents or whatever weren't as big as they were then than they are now. So there was sacrifices that you had to make, like whether you would go for that job that was going to require so much more of your time or not, or even whether you would be considered for it now it's not, I shudder to think that still happens, but I bet it does. A lot of times women are not, considered for roles as much when they have families, particularly. And even if a father has a family, it's just the difference, the difference is just there. So yeah, I saw a lot of it, and I never really kind of think of it because my entire life has, not been served on a silver platter, and so I've always struggled and worked hard to get whatever I wanted or, desired. And it was just for me, it was just part of what I always did.
So, one of the reasons I asked you to be a guest is because the concept of DEI has become something of a boogeyman for those on the right and even some on the left. And yet, I constantly encounter people who can't tell you what it actually means. I'm sure you do too. So, before we continue talking about your work in that arena, maybe we should start with an explanation for those who think they understand what it means. What is DEI, including for those who don't know? What does it stand for?
Well, I think, Pete Buttigieg said so eloquently, like, if you don't know what diversity, equity, and inclusion stand for, think about what the opposites are of those three words. The opposite of diversity is, homogenous, like all of the same, The opposite of equity is inequitable. It's not being treated equitably or fairly or equally. And the opposite of inclusion is exclusion. And so what kind of society, what world would think that operating with the opposite of what DEI stands for is a way to do good business? I will say, a little bit of the history behind DEI was started after the Civil Rights Acts in the 60s, where the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, was started because people were discriminated against, weren't getting jobs because of who they were, the religion they practiced, or their race, or their gender. Even now, there were studies done, years ago, where you can take the same resume and put Ruth Goldberg, I don't know what that, as opposed to Lakeisha, Jones, and Ruth is going to get the job over, or even the interview over Lakeisha, because of just simple things of, biases against a name. So the work of the diversity, equity, and inclusion has been done to equal the unequal playing field. The systems of racism, which were, you know, industries were built on, this country was built on, it was built to help level the playing field, because it's not level. It never has been level. If you look at, nepotism, I'm the first generation in this industry to be able to practice nepotism, and I fully try to every single one. I know I have kids who want to be it. I definitely want to try to practice nepotism, but I'm the first generation to be able to practice nepotism in this industry. When I staffed writer rooms, and even now, as I have worked in more of a corporate space, working through our HR teams and our workforce, looking at it, I use the toolbox example very often. And that is that if you're building a toolbox and you have 8 screwdrivers, you don't need a ninth one. You need a hammer, you need a plier, you need a wrench, you need some nails. You just need diversity in order to be better. And there have been studies that have shown that diverse classrooms are better, diverse, boardrooms are better. We know diverse writers' rooms are better. A diversity of ideas, of stories create a better result in whatever you're doing.
Is there a difference between DEI and affirmative action? Is it just nuance or is it
Yeah, it is a
more than that?
difference. No, no, it absolutely is a difference. Like DEI, by the way, I should have worn a t-shirt. I have a t-shirt that says you're probably DEI too. And on the back of it, it shows all the people who benefited from DEI. Mothers have benefited from it. People with disability, which, 1 in 4 people have a disability, whether it's seen or unseen, and they are the most discriminated group. The divots in sidewalks were done through DEI, practices and, DEI advocates. And those have helped not just people who are in wheelchairs, but moms who have strollers or dads who have strollers, anybody on a stroller. Like if you like I've broken bones left and right, and I, broke my foot a couple of years ago and, was on crutches and I couldn't drive. It was my right foot. And all of those things helped me. The rails in bathrooms or the wider doors have helped, anybody, moms with kids or anything like that. It helps older people. The benefits that the DEI practices have put into place have benefited so many more people than what is, looked upon as an ethnic diversity or, someone's race or sexual orientation or gender. And the benefits of it is much, much more. And listen, I will say to you that, like, I've often said to people, whether it's employees or writers or actors or directors, if you're not talented, then I'm not going to push you forward, just because it does more of a disservice than it does a benefit. And so the whole idea about it not being merit based, about like trying to restore meritocracy, is bullshit, because
Mm.
we all know that for me to get to where I've gotten in my life, I worked twice as hard for it. I didn't have, an uncle opening a door for me. I didn't have anyone doing that. So, I went to state school in New Jersey because it's what we could afford, and turn that into something, and I worked twice as hard to get to where I am, and, work my butt off when I'm there to stay there. Listen, I don't ever take it for granted. I look at my kids and I say to them that they are privileged, which is Black privilege, because, they don't even like, there's never like, I look at, like, when I didn't have a job, it was a sense of urgency for me to get one. And I didn't have the luxury of falling back on, a rich family or even middle class family. I had to work hard to get to where I was. And I think that many people of color are like that as well, So yeah, the whole notion about it not being merit based, it is something that really pisses me off royally.
So bringing it back to your career, I've seen you referred to as a DEI pioneer. Why do you think that is?
Because I humbly say that I created a lot of stuff before there was stuff, before other people did, and the reason why I did it and how I did it was just kind of looking at supply and demand. I would look at, say, for instance, when I was at NBC, I started a late night writers workshop. And the reason I did that is because I was sitting on a panel, and it was right after the Vanity Fair article about David Letterman came out, and about his lack of women or diversity in his staff. And it talked about all of late night. And the moderator of the panel said, don't ask, because I was at NBC, said, don't ask her about that, because, she doesn't work in late night. And I was like, he's right, I don't. But if I can do this in prime time, why can I do this in late night? And so it's first of all, it's having access and having support that has been allowed me to pioneer a lot of the work I've done. But so we created this late night writers workshop that really changed the landscape in late night programming. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of that I've done in my career. We already had a directing program at NBC, but I created one in addition to our one for diverse men, but also one for female, because we looked at across the board and saw how there was a real lack of women directors. And, it was after Me Too. And so there was a really desire to do more female centric things. And so we created Female Forward, which again, like, within 2 years, like, started the careers of almost 30 directors. So I'm super proud of the work of knowing the business, And I think that's a part of it. Like, I know the industry. I grew up in the industry and I've seen it from all sides, at a high level through the low levels of whatever. And I know about the needs of it. I understand the creative process as well as the boardroom. Like, I'm the corporate process. I often say that I am as comfortable in sitting in a boardroom as I am a writer's room. And that's because I understand all of that process. So the reason why I think I got to be called a pioneer in this is because I'm old and I am like, I have had the opportunity to start a lot of programs that just weren't, people didn't think of doing. And also, I want to say it's not just me. I'm working with, like, I've had great people working around me, and that's not just people on my team. When I was at NBC, the head of alternative programming, a guy named Paul Talegdi at the time, came to me and said, "Why aren't you doing any of this stuff for the unscripted team? Like, we want to find directors here as well. We want to do this." And I was like, "Say less. Let's figure out how to do it." And we did. So I was lucky enough to work with people who were forward thinking like that, and at a company or companies that gave me the ability to fund and create these programs.
Obviously, the issues that DEI are trying to address are, they're longstanding in America and they apply to companies across America. But people tend to think of Hollywood as a bastion of liberal thought. Why has this been so necessary in a place dominated by such progressive thinkers?
Well, I will say this to you. I feel like in Hollywood, particularly in the work we do, it's very close. Like, we often say, like, a writer's room is like who you want to invite to your dinner table. You know that, right? Like, you
Yeah.
want a writer's room with people that you know. And oftentimes people want people around them that they feel comfortable with, that they know, that have come highly recommended from people who often look just like them. And they don't want to go outside their comfort. Look, I go to my same hairdresser all the time because I know she's going to do the work I want her to do. It's going to come out how I want it to come out. And I know what's going to cost me. And, like, I know that it's comfortable for me. So why change it? Right. But I'm not, we're not doing hair. Well, people do hair in Hollywood, but I'm saying this is different, and I think oftentimes Hollywood does believe that they're super liberal, but we also have to recognize that it wasn't until recently that there was a person of color in Hollywood who could greenlight anything. And even to this day, like, there's not an ultimate power person of color in this industry who can greenlight and have say over anything. But Wall Street, which is considered very conservative, has had people of color who oversaw billion-dollar funds for decades. So I think, someone said to me once, who was a really bigwig in this industry, as I was flying to Philadelphia on their private jet with them, that this is a young industry. It's still fairly young. Warner Brothers, 3 years ago just celebrated its 100th anniversary. Disney, like, it's the same. And so I'm not making excuses for it. Believe me, I am not. But it's a young industry that was started by families, the Warner Brothers. So it is the nepotism that exists in this industry is probably more, more than in a lot of industries. I don't know about a lot of other industries. I know it exists there as well, but it's real. And so I feel like people go to what they feel like is comfortable around them. And that's why they often, that's kind of why we are, where we are. And it probably isn't as liberal as folks would like it to believe.
Well, I have some personal experience here, and as a white guy, I feel it's necessary for me to discuss some of what I've witnessed in the context of Hollywood, and especially since I think some people might say it wasn't that bad. So I want to read a part of an email I received during the staffing of Dracula, which you worked on while you were at NBC, and I'm not going to identify who sent it, but it says, "Please read this diversity writer. I found out from the diversity department that we," and this is in caps, "do not have to guarantee a script to one of these writers." What is your reaction to that? What did that mean in your mind?
I think they probably didn't know they looked at you as a white guy and thought that you probably would not want to guarantee a script to a person who was diverse. The unfortunate part of that, and so they prefaced it by saying, "Read this it's good to read it. You kind of have to read it, but you don't have to do anything with it. So, okay, white guy, you're going to get a chance to, but just please read it, because not knowing that who you are, what your beliefs are, what your like, what your commitments are, or what you want, they thought they just generalized you as a white guy who doesn't want to probably give someone a script, right? The thing is that, I don't, I don't know who's, like, look, the rules, the WGA rules are different if they're coming in as a diversity. Like, I hated that phrase, by the way. Like, we had a diverse staff writer initiative, but I hated that phrase, when someone would say they are the diversity writer, because automatically they became less than the other
Mm.
writers on staff. Whereas, again, like what I said previously, they worked their asses off to get there just like anybody else did. They didn't have, like, the other person next to him, who knew someone who got them the role on the staff, or was someone's, niece or nephew who got them the role on the staff. And they deserve to be there as much as anyone else. Being someone who's worked in this space for so long, I can tell you, like, for the writing programs that I oversaw or created, we would often get at NBC like 3,500 applications for 8 positions. It was easier to get into Princeton, Harvard, and Yale than it was to get into any of these writing programs. And then once you got into that writing program, you not only like made it past 35, well, I'm terrible at math, 3,400, 34, whatever, like, all the other writers to get there, but you also learned how to write, or like how to become better at your craft from being in that program. You learned the business of it. So you often didn't step in something, while you were while you were in the writer's room. Like, you often were much better there because you had the privilege of being in this writing program. So even though all of the writers in the Diverse Staff Writers Initiative at NBC weren't at that time coming from the writing program, I believe they are now, which is a good thing. Those writers who got in those programs got there because they really were good and deserved it. And so I've gone on off into a little bit of a tangent to say, but your answer to why someone said that to that email probably was because they didn't know that you, Cole, would really want to read this writer and give them serious consideration, despite the fact that they were diverse, not because of the fact that they were diverse. And I'm curious, what was your response, and how did that make you feel?
So it was, it all appalled me. Things I was new to it. This was the
Mhm.
first show I created. There was only so much I felt that I could say without putting myself at risk, which is, of course, its own problem, right? That the people who can speak up are often protecting themselves, and if you're in a place with no power, as I mostly was, you're unsure what to do. And so my first danger signal, the first alarm bell for me was that the first raft of submissions I received for the writers' room, about 60 writers, and I couldn't identify a single female name. There might have been women in there, but they would have been writing under names that could pass as a
Mhm.
traditionally male name. And so I expressed concern about that because I had told everybody up front that I wanted it to be a 50-50 split room in this regard. And so I kept pushing on that. And that became a very painful experience, that even when I went and asked agents, and a lot of this I was told was coming from the agencies. And that's where you begin to realize there's a problem with who's being represented at
Mhm.
these agencies. And I would ask for more diverse writers, and I would end up with 2 out of the next 15. And that was deeply problematic. And then I progressed to people of color. That was mostly futile. The idea of getting anything more, I mean, I think one of the best submissions I received was from a Latina writer, and I had to beg to receive that submission. And so at that point, I realized pushing for people of color was not the hill I was going to be able to win on. I could do it with
Mhm.
women. I just didn't have the clout, but I was told by others that there would be this diversity program. So I was at least reassured that would work out. And I realized it very quickly, and I realized it from other people I knew as well, that that was just an opportunity to get free labor and tick a
Mhm.
box and
Mhm.
shut the network up, that they
Mhm.
didn't really have any interest in what that perspective might bring at all. I think the writer's assistant was probably esteemed more in their
Hmm.
mind because at least they were going to, stand at the
Yeah,
board.
and what I would always tell people is that you may get that exactly what you said, and it's your job to go in there and change their mind. And the best wins that I had was when people forgot that they were the quote unquote diversity hire and just started looking at them as great writers because they often were. And, that was the ultimate win for me. When people started taking credit for the people we found and placed on shows, then take all the credit for them because that's how they're going to succeed. So yeah, I mean, I think that anywhere you go in, like I think hopefully now if I go into a situation, people know my reputation and my work, but I still never don't feel like I have to prove myself. Like I never, and I don't know if that's a woman thing or a diverse thing, but I never go into someplace not feeling that I have to prove myself. And I think that that's a privilege that I just not afford it. Like I just not afford it. I think I believe there are white cisgender men who go into a role and don't feel like they have to, especially at a level that I go into roles, right? But I still feel like I have to work my ass off and prove myself there. And that's just not, and I tell that to talent all the time. Like your job is to make sure people don't look at you in like, don't be true to yourself 100%. Don't ever not be who you are, but be good enough that they forget. Like, you know what I mean? Like that if they had a mind thought of you coming in there as a diversity hire, then it's your job to make them just see you as a writer.
So, what is it that scares so many people about DEI in America today? It wasn't an issue anybody talked about 5 years ago who weren't in business. I guess. Why? What's happened?
Well, I wonder like who's really afraid of it. Like is it fear or is it just now having the ability to do what they've always wanted to do? Like, like I think if anything, I think the fear was previously when DEI after George Floyd was murdered and Black Lives Matter happened, there was more of a fear of not being on board with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Because if you did, then you're racist, right? So I think it was more of a fear that way. Now we're looking at a time where there is an administration that will say, that is challenging NBC's Versant spinoff, and is saying to ABC Disney, we're going to look into your diversity practices. You know, ultimately, these are businesses that need to get, approval from the Department of Justice or the FCC in order to get their companies merged or acquired or spun off. And I believe that there's a real fear of the backlash of what will happen if the administration or whoever does those approvals look at it and says, well, we're not going to approve it because you have DEI influence, right? So what I've found is that a lot of companies are still doing the work. They're just not broadcasting it as loudly as they used to when, particularly after George Floyd was murdered. So I really think that the fear came on the other side of it. Like there was more fear, like if we don't do this, we are going to be considered racist and not good human beings. And I think that that's a huge fear among, like you said it earlier, no one wants to be considered a racist, right? So now I think that the companies that are pulling back from it are doing so because they can, you know, or they're afraid of what will happen to them in a business sense if they need approval from a vindictive administration. But we can take Costco and Target here in the States, and we can take those two examples of what happens when you pull back from these efforts as opposed to when you double down on it. Costco has seen their membership rise and their foot traffic increase, while Target, I believe the number is like 28%, their stock has gone down and their foot traffic has completely like, dwindled as well. So like the people who are pulling back from it are seeing, the companies that are pulling back from it are seeing that there is, a downside to it. And, there was a McKinsey report a couple of years ago about the 10 billion with a B dollars of black dollars alone that is being left on the table in Hollywood. 10 billion with a B. Like, what industry knowingly leaves $10 billion on the table? I've always said, like, don't do this work because it's your moral objective. Do it because of the business imperative of it. Like, know that, Latinos open films more than any other, bigger and better than any other demographic. And yet there's so few films where Latino storylines are main, the main characters of it. And it's amazing to me that you don't look at this as a business and understand the importance of inclusivity.
Well, in that regard, all of these efforts, especially I think the last 15 years, how successful have they been in Hollywood in your mind to impact profitability, but also just the lives of people behind and in front of the camera, the kind of stories that are being told? Has it
Yeah.
been an
Yeah.
achievement?
I mean, listen, diverse films are generally not, they don't have the luxury of having as big a budget as non-diverse films. So when you look at what they cost versus how they perform, they've always performed. They've performed internationally, they perform, domestically. They've always performed. And I think for so long, people have gotten away with saying like, oh, that doesn't perform internationally. And it's not true. That the hip hop culture is international. Like people have taken, specifically Black and Latino culture and it is international. And you look at the success of K-pop here in the States, it's like people are hungry for other cultures. And so to say that these shows or films don't perform is not really looking at the math, because the math isn't math. Their math is not mathing, because we know that they do perform based on what it costs and what it makes, they generally outperform. And also, even if a diverse film does flop, we unfortunately don't have the luxury of saying, okay, well, we'll do another one and see how it works, because a lot of white films get that luxury, and that's not afforded to films of color. I mean, like, look, people of color always are like, oh God, like you hear a news story, you're like, oh God, please don't let them be Black. Like, it's still there. Even SNL does a skit about it, and it's hilarious. But yeah, because we're like, we don't have the right to fail. We don't have the luxury of failing for fear of we're never going to have another opportunity.
So when I discussed the subject with peers in the film TV business, a few brought up an interesting observation that they've, I guess, been discussing. The word equity appears to disturb some people because the implication of it is that artist X has an opportunity created for them, and I'm not suggesting they didn't earn it, but that job is interpreted by others as taking away their equity in the business. For you to get a slice of pie, I have to give up some of my pie. Do you think there's any validity in that?
No, period. There's not. There's always been enough of the pie to go around. Listen, I think our business is contracting in ways that we've never seen it before. But it's the crab barrel mentality of not letting other people, the crab barrel, the crab trike, they never get out of the barrel because they always pull each other down, and it's that crab barrel mentality of not allowing other people or opening the door for people because you think that you won't have it. And that's questioning you are questioning your own abilities, because particularly if you've already had a stint in the industry and you think that it's going to get taken away from you, because that's what you said, taken away. It's not going to get taken away from you if you deserve to have it still, right? So the concept of someone diverse taking away a job from someone who isn't diverse is just not valid, and it never has been. Like, this industry is too expensive to give opportunities to people who don't deserve them. So again, the whole thing about being merit-based or not merit-based, I don't believe that, because there's no one who's going to get an opportunity. By the way, not a diverse person is going to get an opportunity just because, for the heck of it. They're going to get it because they deserve it.
Personally, and this is just, my observation, I can't help but feel a lot of white people who supported this within Hollywood, who were vocal initially about it, thought that people of color were just going to go off and make their own shows and not actually compete in the same space. So something more like the 90s where their Girlfriends was on television, and Martin, that was something, you're doing your thing and we're going to keep doing our thing. Wait, you're in our thing now, you're in our space now. And I feel like that was seen as an unwelcome incursion. I don't know if you want to opine on that.
Here's the thing, like you're saying the things we all thought, but I, rarely hear because, there's not a lot of white people are going to admit that, So, let's talk about the 90s, television 90s. Like you look at shows like Martin and Girlfriends or Living Single and, all of the shows that launched networks like Fox and launched networks like UPN and the WB. They were all launched on shows that were considered urban shows. Those networks started and had success off of the backs of those shows. And what does that say to you? That says to you that, and this was before, DirecTV and recording and streaming. But when you're watching television in real time, statistics show you that Black folks watch television in real time more than any other group does. And we want to see ourselves represented on television. So those shows were wildly successful and actually built those networks. And then when Fox was doing really well, they started doing other things. When the CW was doing really well, they started doing other shows. And those urban, quote unquote, shows were taken off the air. And so, by the way, if you take our shows off the air, then we're going to come and do like, and again, it's like, earlier, like I will say to you that I used to struggle with, the fact that, if I was saying if you have a Black character on a show or you're doing a Black storyline, you need to have Black writers or you need to have Latino writers for that. And then the converse wasn't true. Like it wasn't true that if it's a white show, you need to have only just white writers. And part of the reason why I was like, wait, like then that means no writers of color will ever get opportunities because there's mostly only white shows on the air, right? What I know is that people of color have lived in the white world forever. So we understand, how the home life many times because we've, raised their kids or fed their food or, whatever. Like we get it. And we helped build this country. And so we understand it, I don't know that opposite is true, like I don't know that there are, like I said earlier, there are a lot of, women who have my experience, like white women who have my experience of growing up, and could understand it as much. So ultimately what we want in this industry is the best stories, and the best stories come, like I would often say, like if you're writing a story about a birthday party and you just have, the same people from the same household telling that story about a birthday party, you're going to get just one point of view. But if you write a story about a birthday party and you have that household and you have the household down the street and you have the household around the corner, everybody, even though everybody had birthday parties, how they did them and their experiences with them are different. And it's those differences that make our stories better. It's those differences that make our boardrooms better. It's those differences that make our classrooms better. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think I probably lost the question there.
No,
but
great.
I know what you were saying is like if like first of all, like for someone to even say that, like who like we know that there are not people of color who control this industry yet, or many industries yet. So to say like it's out, but who assigned it to them to own it in the first place? To say like if you like are you coming for our shows now? Like wait, what? Like how does that make sense?
I think there's a question I've asked myself. I broke into the business when there was no real competition beyond other white men for the most part. And especially in features, I was writing action and I was perpetually told that women weren't up to writing action. It was not a strong suit for them. So I competed against a very small segment of the overall population. And so there's a real question in a fair setting, would I have broken into the business as easily as I did, or would I have had to work another 5 years or 10 years? And I think that reflects many people who are established in the business who are concerned by or afraid, whatever the right politically correct term we want to use, for seeing their opportunities diminished because other people are actually, because really what it is, they have to compete for the jobs now in a fair playing field, or a more fair playing field, because it's not fair yet. It's not
No.
actually, equitable yet.
And listen, I would say that, are they feeling the same way about like the Gen Z, or the, who's coming up there, the Gen Zer who's coming up there to take their job, like, so who is a white cisgender male? Like, so like, well, do your job and be good at it. And then you're not afraid of someone else coming and taking it away from you. Don't blame it on diversity.
Well, there's a statistic here. I think it was very poorly framed, sent out by the WGA, that I think is really useful here. They list off basically all the jobs that have shifted to BIPOC writers, particularly mid-level BIPOC women and lower-level BIPOC men, and decreases in series writers who are white women and white men. That's the first paragraph that ends with decreases in this market, in this space. And then the next space, 66.4% of screenwriters in 2024 were men, and 32.6% were women. That is not 50-50 or remotely close. And then on top of that, 63.6% of screenwriters were white, and only 18.9% were BIPOC, which is, it's not even remotely close to a fair playing field.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still
Mm-hmm.
complaining. Or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know what the right way to express my frustration with this is, but it's not a fair playing field yet, and yet it's not good enough for them.
I've always said that in success, that, people who do this work will put themselves out of work. There's still a big need for this work. We've not achieved success in this. There's not equity here. And again, it's like what I said earlier is like, how do you envision any place and think that not having equity there is a good thing? I don't understand it. Like, even if, listen, if it's an all black show, I feel like you need other points of view. You don't need to have just all black writers, or people behind the cameras or whatever. Like, have another point of view as well. So I don't understand how you look at, people who are trying to achieve an equitable industry, equity in an industry that has historically not had it, and look at it as a bad thing. Or in a country, by that matter. For that matter, in a country.
Well, I would think it would sound anti-American to people.
And I would say to you, read a book. And I would say to you, read a book.
So final question for now. You're a black kid in New Orleans, maybe a Latino kid in Phoenix, or a Muslim kid from Dearborn whose parents came from Pakistan. And you have a dream of going to Hollywood and making it as just an actor, not just an actor, but a screenwriter, a director. Do you have a better chance of making your dream come true today than 25 years ago?
It pains me to say no, you don't. But I would say to that, probably, I would say yes and no. I would say yes, because I do believe that no matter what and how pessimist we are, we understand that good stories look like a lot of different things. We understand that. And I think that there are people in place now who want to tell stories that are not just like them. And I will also say that there are a lot of platforms now that you can tell your story on without having, there are a lot more platforms for you to be able to tell your story than there was 25 years ago. You can create something on YouTube, it can go viral, and people will flock to you. So I always say, don't wait for permission to do your passion, do it. So I hesitated only because I think that we are in a time where this industry has contracted substantially. But that said, there are still so much more. So I'm going to take it back and say, yes, there is opportunity for you, because there are a lot of different platforms for you to tell your story on. There are a lot of different avenues, and also I would just say to those kids, just make sure you're good. Like, practice your craft. Don't say I want to act and just put a camera in front of your face and think that you can do it. Study it. Like, as if you were an athlete. If you want to write, you should be writing. Like, you should be writing. You should be getting feedback on your writing. You want to direct, take your phone and start shooting stuff. Like, there is opportunity now. There's technology now that will allow it to be done. So yeah, I would say yes, there's a lot more opportunity now than there was 25 years ago. Does this industry still have, a long way to go? Sure, it does. But there's a lot more opportunity now, I would say, than there was 25 years ago.
Great answer. Thank you so much for
Of course.
joining me for this conversation. You're going to be back in a moment for a bonus episode, but
Okay.
this has been great.
Thanks, Cole.
As for you out there listening, thanks as always for spending your time with me here at 5 a.m. Story Talk. What did you make of my conversation with Karen? There's a link in the show notes that will take you to the 5 a.m. Story Talk newsletter, where you can leave comments and ask questions about everything Karen and I discussed. Don't run just yet, though. There's a bonus episode to come, as promised. Karen Horne returns to discuss a seminal artwork not from her life, as my guest normally would, but instead 3 from Hollywood's history. We're going to break down the cultural and economic impact of a trio of diverse films and TV series: A Different World, Barbie, and Sinners. Instead of just telling you diverse storytelling is hugely profitable, we're going to get microscopic as to why it is, while enjoying a little cultural discourse about these great pieces of art, too. But to listen to this 5 a.m. Story Talk bonus episode, you're going to need to play it at either Apple or Substack, where the 5 a.m. Story Talk newsletter is currently hosted. If you're not listening to me via Apple Podcasts right now, you can find the links you need in the show notes. One more thing before you go. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you take the time to follow 5 a.m. Story Talk so you can keep up with the arts and culture conversation I'm trying to have here. Leaving a 5-star rating and/or review is a great no-cost way to support this podcast. Upcoming guests include Late Night with the Devil writer-directors the Cans brothers, Doctor Strange co-writer and director Scott Derrickson, and human and digital rights activist Lizzie O'Shea. Obviously, I'm trying to do everything I can to curate an amazing experience here for you, while learning a thing or two about the arts and our world myself. Thanks again for being here, Story Talkers. See you soon.